Communities are smart. They can probably help you with even designing a better solution than you even thought of. And this is where that diversity of thought comes along. If you're only working with people that are on your teams and in the corporate structures, and they have the one mindset of, we just got to be able to push this through, having someone else give you a different perspective on it may actually help your teams come up with a better solution.
I'm Carolyn Pars, clean tech communicator, coach, and host of Just Power, a podcast about creating a just transition to a clean energy future that leaves no one behind. If affordable, reliable, clean energy that benefits everyone is important to you, you're in the right place, my friend. We have the power to make that happen, and that's what's happening each week on the Just Power podcast. Welcome to Just Power. Today, we are going to do some myth busting with my guest, Pamela Phan. She is an award-winning diversity strategist, trainer, and speaker, and she helps companies lay a foundation for shared and equitable solutions that go beyond our differences and boundaries. So we're going to dissolve some of those perceived boundaries today around how energy equity is a time and cost drain in our energy transition, and flip the switch on that to how, with right planning, it can be a profit center for the energy industry. So welcome, Pamela.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for having me on.
All right. I'm very excited. So much fun we're going to have dismantling some of those ideas that keep us stuck, because there's such a business opportunity here, so that it can be like a win-win for energy providers and communities, right? But before we dive in, I want to ask you, how did you get started on your energy equity journey?
Well, I have to tell you, it was definitely by design, but it wasn't by my design. I had worked in the food service industry for 22 years, worked for the Coca-Cola company here in Atlanta, and got laid off around 2018, and knew that I wanted to go into nonprofit work, but wasn't sure exactly what I would be doing in nonprofit, and landed at Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance, where I started learning more about energy. I mean, for me, the only thing that I knew about energy was paying a bill every month. Like, I got a utility bill.
Like most of us.
Right. And so I paid my utility bill every month. But I started really learning a lot about the industry itself, about the history of the energy sector. And then as a part of my role, I had to go to a lot of conferences and events, and within the first, couple of weeks to couple of months. And one of the things that I noticed going to these events with 600 people, 400 people, 200 people, many times I was the only person of color in the room, meaning, well, the only Black person in the room, and one of the few people of color in the room. Definitely one of the only handfuls of women in the room. And so I started asking myself by about the third conference, like, what is going on with diversity in this space? Why am I not seeing people who look like me? But I'm hearing dialogue and I'm hearing programmatic work being discussed that sounds like it would be geared towards people who probably look like me. And so I started thinking, like, that's really interesting. Yeah. So that was how I got started. Like, immediately went and got certified as a diversity professional and trainer, because I thought that I could add some value and some help and some discussion to why they were running into so many issues with their programmatic work, or why they were having issues with not reaching the right customer. So yeah, that's what got me started.
Right. Not asking the right questions, not understanding the problems, not. Right. All right. That's very interesting. I love that, because I've gone to these energy conferences too. And from a gender standpoint, I'm often this, like, is anyone else here?
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Especially a few years ago. So this was well before many companies made their commitments to diversity and equity after George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery were murdered. So this was before that time even. And, we did see some women there, but they were mostly consultants, not necessarily within the organization, not in leadership roles. And so, yeah, there was obviously a problem before companies started making those commitments. And which I'm really hoping now, as we're starting to see some of those commitments turn back from some organizations, that many of them are holding true, because the you can't deny the numbers, the economic numbers, and how you becoming a more diverse company has benefited your organization. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll be talking about that from an energy equity standpoint too, right?
Yeah.
And that goes back to the myth, right? That it's not profitable. Well, we're going to get into that. But, I want to ask you, before we get into that subject matter also, is that what does energy equity mean to you personally?
Yeah, so for me personally, it just means that we're allowing the same opportunities for people who have not had those opportunities as we are for people who can afford the opportunities. So really it comes down to affordability. It comes down to access to opportunity. And it comes down to us really being more forward thinking and actually being intentional about how we're placing energy. One thing I've always said is that if we solve for folks that are most vulnerable in these energy systems, then the rest of the work becomes easy. But if we're designing for people who only have access, or people who only show interest on the onset, then we're missing a whole target segment of folks who actually probably need those services even more than anyone, and could benefit from having those things in place. So, yeah, it just really just means when people think about equity, a lot of times they think about you know they want to put the diversity, equity, inclusion part in it. But equity means really just bringing folks from here to here.
Yeah.
So it's not some taking away from any particular group of people, but it's helping a group of folks or people who haven't had the access or the opportunity before to be able to level up and be at the same level. So that's really what we're talking about. Equity means access. It means affordability. It means, intentionality in those communities as well, or for those folks who haven't been able to experience something.
Beautifully, beautifully said. Thank you. That made it super clear. Because sometimes I say the words energy equity, even energy justice, and people don't know. Some people don't know what that means. Oh, it's great. Yeah. So that's I asked that question for all of our guests. So, and this is the next question I ask is, what is the importance to you? What is the importance of energy equity in our transition or energy transition today?
Well, to talk about energy equity, we have to talk about even energy justice. We have to acknowledge injustices. And then this is the part, Carolyn, I think that rubs people the wrong way, because when you talk about an injustice, that means something had to have been done wrong. When you talk about justice, period, that means that there had to have been an injustice for there to be a need for justice. So, and this the injustice that folks have a problem with really kind of acknowledging. But if you look back through history and you look at our systems and the way that energy systems were put together, there has always been an injustice, and most of it, yes, was systematically and racially influenced for there to be those injustices. If we talk about redlining and how people of color were placed in undesirable communities, or communities where there were environmental concerns or dumping or problems, or there was lack of access to transportation, or a lack of access to clean drinking water, or a lack of access to affordability, or like a strong grid or a reliable grid. So we have to really make that acknowledgement that there was an injustice somewhere. Does that mean that's fully where we are today, that people are intentionally making injustices as they did back then? Not necessarily, right? There might not be intention, but we still have to go back, remediate all the things that happened before in order to make it equitable, right? So you have to acknowledge those past harms and the past lack of resources in order to in order to move forward. So that's really the important part of it for me, is that we're not leaving communities behind as we think about transitioning, that we're bringing these communities along in the transition, because if we don't, then we're going to be looking, I mean, we're already really in a system of have and have nots. But just imagine if we continue the transition just for those who can afford it, just for those communities who can pay extra taxes to upgrade their grid, and we leave all these other communities behind who are the ones that are impacted the most by climate change and climate events and weather events and heat islands and all these other things that cause, whether it's their utility bill to rise, lack of good housing stock, and lack of great housing codes, things of that nature that, really is what really impacts the envelope of your home and impacts your community and the comfortability of where you work, live, and play. So we really have to acknowledge all of that and understand that if we don't solve for that, we really are creating ourselves a even worse economic departure than there is now.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, you couldn't have said it better. And then the cost, the extravagant cost of our new grid of putting solar and wind, geothermal, and even nuclear on our grid, and the transition of what that is, and the burden of what that is for all, right? And especially low income and moderate to low income, right? Or everyone's seeing that. And as we get, as we go out further, the 2030s, 2040s, that's going to even blend into middle income. So this is an urgency that's happening right now. So we're looking at, reparations of our past, and not to actually repeat them and make it worse, actually, frankly, going into the future. So important. I cannot stress that. That's what this whole show is about.
And I love that you said for all. So we're not talking about making things better just for a segment of people, right? We're talking about everyone. You mentioned low to moderate income. That moderate income, that is a community right now, that a group of folks that we've kind of left out of the conversation a lot of times, but many times they don't qualify for the light programs, and they still can't afford to move and push measures forward. So yeah, that moderate income is a big place and a big group that we really have to be intentional also about solving for. So it really is for everyone that we have to be making these considerations for. Again, not just for those who can afford it, and not just for those that we think can afford it, or for those we think can't afford it. Like, we've got to take our own thinking out of it and really design systems that benefit everyone.
Yeah. And, there's a future guest, everyone, let you know that will come on from Accenture, which is a consulting company, and they did a big study on this. And actually, what I loved about it is that they broke down the customer into so many. It's really the individual customer, instead of seeing these big chunks, and creating programs and systems for the totally customer centric, right? So that some people can afford or don't mind paying more for energy, and they're usually younger or in urban areas, where rural and some low income are, it's a different story, but they still, everybody wants solar on their, well, not everybody, but we want to have clean energy.
Yes.
And so making it so that it's really diversified, even how we serve it up in our energy system, it's just not set up that way. And that's what has to change. Which brings me to our this whole profit center, which it is, if it has to be rethought, right? Like totally rethought, invented. So with that, what do you think is the biggest misconception that energy providers might be having about investing in energy equity, right? And how do you help them see the opportunity they might be missing?
Yeah. I think one that they have to take the buzzwords out of it, especially in this climate now where the buzzwords are the things that kind of are rubbing people wrong, or they're like, oh, here we go again with this equity program or this diversity program. Take the buzzwords out of it. And let's think about this in a business sense. If you have a stock portfolio and you were asked to diversify your stock portfolio because you shouldn't keep all of one thing in, let's say, my Coca-Cola stock, or I might not want to keep everything in my whatever Walmart stock or Staples or Starbucks stock. You want to diversify that, right, in order for it to grow and have its optimal growth. The same is with energy, right? Why should we not be diversifying our energy portfolios to include a mixture of things to give the best outcomes? Like if we have all of our eggs in just, electricity, that's not going to bear out well for us. If we have all of our eggs in the bucket for natural resources and fossil fuels, that's not going to, we see where that is going with the usage of fossil fuels and not thinking about electrification. So we do have to same way that you treat your pocketbooks, we've got to treat this energy sector. We've got to be able to diversify it. What I want them to think about is just like taking if you take the equity out of it and you're just thinking about people and putting a humanistic lens behind this work. If you would want this for yourself, would you not want it for others? Would you not want other people to have? If I want solar on my home and I know that it's going to bring my bill down, why would I not want it for someone else who already has a problem paying their electric bill? So when when you break it down into like a humanistic approach, it really does simplify the thinking. Now, I don't know who would do this, but if you went into a room and said, would you not want the same thing for your family? Would you not want that for another family as well? Would you not want people to have a fairly low utility bill where they don't have to think about paying for whether or not they're going to pay for medicines or pay to keep the lights on? Would you want food on your table? Would you want, your kids to be able to do their homework because they have enough light to do so? And then if you ask them, would you want that for another family as well? I think most people are inherently good and nobody would say, no, I don't want another family to have that. So I think that if we just broke it down to the most simplest humanistic approach, then that helps to make decisions. Now, profitability. We understand that businesses have to be profitable. Anytime I work with organizations and I'm thinking about, you've got to make money too. And so, coming from a different lens of how do we make this work and still have a profit, just when you do the right thing and when you do what's inherently right by most people, you will for sure make a profit. You will for sure be profitable. So that's what I want them to really understand. Like, do for folks as if you were doing it for yourself. Think in those terms, because when I work with organizations and I work with companies, that is like the first thing that I go in and train on is how to become more empathetic people, how to put ourselves in other people's places, in other people's shoes, or imagine a time when you yourself could be that person. And then let's start thinking about our programs and how different they could be if we operated from that lens, right?
Yeah.
And that's
Wow.
operating from a lens of equity.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you on that. There's this whole human side to energy that I think needs to be, the volume needs to be turned up on that. But I'm going to just say there are some, hey, just as like there's a diversity in income, there's also diversity in mindsets, right? Of what people think. And I remember being at a conference and talking to someone about energy equity. And she said to me, she goes, what she would have answered, what you said is like, yeah, I want another family to have it. I just don't want to have to pay for that. That's what like it should be the government, or it should be, it wasn't like she was like out, but she had that piece that, that I don't want to be the one to have the burden of paying for that. So how would you dismantle that?
I would first ask, one, are you sure that you are the one paying for it? Are you sure that are you the only one paying for it? Because last I remember, even those folks who we're talking about are taxpayers, right?
Right.
So I think it's about dismantling the myths that is only coming out of your pocket. Are they also not taxpayers? Do they also not pay taxes on groceries and on their utilities and on their jobs and things like that? So they too are paying into this tax paying system, right? That should afford them some of the benefits of that. Now, what all happens behind the scenes after we pay the taxes and how it's all dwelled out, in the economic systems and the economic sphere and how it gets out there into the system, I don't know all that part. But I know that as tax-paying people, we all should be entitled, to be able to live comfortably.
We all should be entitled to turn on the lights, right? To not have an energy burden, which is it's our birthright, right? I mean, it's so basic. I'm with you on that. I'm totally with you on that.
But there are policies and things that need to be in place too. We know that this works as a system. We know that it's not an individual's responsibility to ensure that energy burden is not happening for other people. So this is the conversation I would probably have with that person, is the responsibility is not on one person. It is a systematic problem that's going to take a systematic, holistic approach.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It's going to take a systematic, holistic approach to do that. So you can agree with that. Yeah, I don't want you to pay for, right? We just have to change it all so that doesn't happen. And it can. It can, right?
It can.
So, yeah. And there's a lot of reasons for energy providers to do it today, which brings me into investors. It brings me into regulators. It brings me into the communities that so want and need this. So let's touch on that. It's like it's a perfect storm right now. And I know we have a I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but because we have a big change that's happening right now. Right. But from just from a business standpoint, if done well, it has it's positive to your bottom line if you do it, because there's so much can go wrong and does go wrong that can become very expensive very fast when it's not done well. So, for instance, regulators, right? We're seeing them increasingly scrutinizing utility equity commitments. I just came upon a paper from 11 commissioners on why energy and affordability and equity need to be more in the forefront in all of our rate cases, right? And so it's like that's a big That it was a big statement and a paper. I'll put that in the show notes. How does equity for you give equity planning give companies an advantage, right? In, say, the rate cases or regulatory proceedings?
Yeah. So I think, one, when you involve equity from the very beginning, very beginning, so as you're designing, and you're thinking about how you design your rate case, and you think about what the impact is going to look like on communities, on people, I mean, all people, I think when you go into it thinking about it, then you can make better decisions. You can make better decisions for the whole group of folks. So again, when we're talking about equitable, we're talking about for all people, and what it looks like. But if you know going into it that it's going to disproportionately impact significantly a group of folks, then that's when you stop and you rethink and you say to yourself or your teams, like, let's rethink this. Let's think about this. This doesn't look right because it's going to impact folks who are already having issues, and it's going to impact them in a hard way.
Yeah.
So it really is the thing about, this is where equitable design comes into the process, whether it's with rate cases, whether it's with programs. You really have to sit in the very beginning as you're designing something to understand whether or not it's going to work or not work. And then maybe even do a risk assessment on it. I think, I've talked to folks before about doing the risk of being inequitable. So I've talked to organizations about risk assessment for everything else. Do a risk assessment for inequity, and see, like, if we don't think this out equitable, what does that look like? How could it potentially impact us? And we're not talking about just the impacts on people, but then the social impacts too, and the impacts on the organization. Every organization, especially any corporate structure, at least that I know of, loves to have a good image out there if they can, right? That they're doing good in communities. They have foundations typically that give away a lot of dollars to community projects and things. But as soon as that rate case happens and the price goes up, people are protesting. So it doesn't matter how much you've done in the community or how much you've spent in the community. You've raised their prices again.
Yeah.
And folks are upset. You know why? Because you didn't include them on the design part of it. You didn't include them from the beginning and have conversations. Or even if it took an explanation of, let me get an advisory committee or a group of folks from the community and tell them, like, hey, we think we might have to raise rates, and here is why. And here's what it would look like for you. What does this mean for you?
Yeah.
So even doing that, an explanation and education on why rates need to be raised and what is it paying for, what is it doing.
It's so much better doing it that before you go into a regulatory case, right? This is where you come together with your community, right? Yeah. And you say, this is what's happening here, right? And having that dialogue because people want to be heard, right?
Absolutely. And then possibly coming up with some other solutions. I tell you, communities are smart. They can probably help you with even designing a better solution than you even thought of. And this is where that diversity of thought comes along. If you're only working with people that are on your teams and in the corporate structures, and they have the one mindset of, we just got to be able to push this through, having someone else give you a different perspective on it may actually help your teams come up with a better solution than that particular rate design. Maybe there's another way to design the rate that's even better. So on the onset, you should be thinking about it. It's going to be more profitable in the end.
Yes. It gives, that's why it has to be integrated from the beginning, because the engineer who is designing in the design phase, and where is that substation going to go, or that has no real understanding perhaps of the location in the community and what's important there. Just to touch on before we get into, I want to talk about investors, right? Because that's hot right now, and I've heard more and more about that. But from a regulatory standpoint, I heard this from a Midwest, someone who is a sustainability director at a Midwest utility has said recently what they're hearing when they go into rate cases is that they're being asked about what is your equity position. Well, how does your what does energy equity mean at your organization? And unfortunately, some of those people answering didn't even know what that meant. Okay, that's not good, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not good. So first is there's also an understanding and an education and of what this is and how it affects the energy system and how everybody, it's systematic, right? So how everybody, every department, it gets affected, right? Communications,
Yep.
customer relations, government affairs, tribal, all of those pieces come together on obviously sustainability. So moving on to ESG investors, right? They're asking tougher questions these days and asking about justice and equity. How do you help energy providers? How can you help them tell a better story, more compelling story for investors to attract investments into their company?
So, one way that I help organizations be able to tell that better story is to sit down with leaders of an organization and really understand their why. Their why. Why would you want to do this? Is this just because again, there were a lot of commitments that were made that some folks really didn't want to do it, but they felt the social pressure to do it. So is this something that you really want to do? Or is this just something that you just want to, kind of like the trend that everybody's doing it and you don't want to be the person that didn't do it?
Yeah.
But sit down and really get an idea from the leadership if they're committed to doing it. Because what we're going to do, there's something that my organization developed, which is building out a cultural competency framework for the organization. And you have to start there to understand,
Tell me what that is.
Yeah, so it's really looking at an organization as a whole, their internal and external, to understand their ability to move cultural competency forward. So some could say is to move DEI forward, but really is to move the needle on ensuring that we have, that we're looking at our organization in a culturally competent way. So it's taking, so once I get leadership on board, it's also looking at how they do business. How have you been doing business? How have your programs been running? Are they successful? Look at many of these LMI programs, low to moderate income programs. They've been running these programs for many, many, many years and they're not meeting targets. Why is that? So really doing a deep dive and sitting down and talking through why haven't your programs met their goals, and how can we fix that? So sitting down with teams, really doing deep dives with those teams, and thinking about program design and what does that look like. And again, going back to the people and connecting the people to the work. Because even though you have a job, it's not just a job, especially when your job impacts people's day-to-day lives. So we really have to work on the people too, to get them to understand, like, this is more than just coming in and punching a clock every day. Like, whatever the program that you're working on is going to essentially impact someone's life. So working internally in that manner, but ensuring that we have leadership buy-in and support to be able to do that. Talking about profits, building out strategic plans that actually work with metrics that actually work to hold people accountable for ensuring that 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 whatever we put in place is going to work. And then looking externally and making sure that they have the right partnerships, the right alignments, the right community engagement, um, to ensure that it all works together. So it's really about building out complete systems, and thinking about organizational competency. Some people will say operationalizing equity, but I really think it's about building out cultural competency throughout the organization for the win. Because at the end of the day, we want the organization to win. We want the organization to see profits to their bottom lines. We want the organization and profits also include not just your external profits and numbers, but it includes your people. So many organizations aren't even thinking, like, when you build a more culturally competent organization, you have happier employees. You have employees that work harder. You have employees that want to contribute to the bottom line. You have employees that feel good about coming to work every day. And that's going to save you in your training expenses that you've hired someone on, you've put them through training, and then they leave within 3 months because they realize that they're not making a difference, that they're not happy at work, that they're maybe causing folks to increase their, but like they're going to leave. So, so it's internal structures that then impact the external work as well. So you also want to think about keeping those personnel numbers at a status quo instead of losing people, because you're not doing the right thing as an organization.
Yeah.
So it really impacts internally and impacts externally.
Yes. Especially we look at the younger generations, Gen Z and millennials are kind of moving it into power, right? But those are generations, really they ask those questions, not so much how much am I going to make, but also, what does your company invest in, right?
Absolutely.
What is your maybe your equity or a just transition plan? These are questions come up in those interviews. So that, attracting and retaining talent is you touched on that. That's a really big. You mentioned getting leadership on board. Okay. Yeah. Woo-hoo, that's a big subject in itself. And I want to ask a little bit about that. So how do you help energy providers, or maybe even the people that work in the energy company, or could be externally to communities, how to build in organizationally, what am I trying to say? The buy-in, right? Mm-hmm. The buy-in from the leadership, right, at the top. Especially from departments that might not necessarily see themselves as directly connected, right, to the work. Maybe some of the field guys out there, but some of them might not see it directly connected to their work, like, say, sustainability director might. So how do you get this buy-in from leadership? What are some of the ways to do that?
Well, I like to start with talking to them about their organizational, their mission, their vision, and the values. And typically within those values, you'll find something there that talks about how they work with customers, or, and
customer satisfaction's huge.
Customer satisfaction. So I'll usually start there, and then I'll ask them, so when you're talking about that, what does that mean for you? Who is it for? Is it for just a few customers? Is it for all your customers? And so when we can get
how do you break that down?
That is for all the customers, every customer that they touch. All right, we're on the same page. That's the first start. We're all on the same page then if it's for everybody. So then we've got to start thinking with everyone in mind.
Yeah, nice.
Yes. So, and at the end of the day, again, especially if it's an investor-owned organization or utility, I'm going to talk to them about, how do they go back and operationalize this and talk about how they make profits off of this work, because that's what investors want to know. And we will always go in and look at your strategic plan. We'll always, and then figure out where does that equitable work lie within your strategic plan. Everything has to point to the operations goals. everything has to report, it has to point to the goals. So every department that has to deliver on something, they all have KPIs or key performance indicators that they have to deliver on, then everything has to lean into that, including how we operationalize or how we build cultural competency into that organization. So it all goes in, it all folds into the work. And then, like, you're going to see a true return on investment because we're going to be hitting those KPIs. We're going to be aligned with the strategic plan that management has set forth. Nothing is going to come off of that. It's not like we're doing this as a side job or as an amendment to like another program. No, this is all built into the organizational structure. So when they can see it, and then they can see how it then, contributes to the bottom line, that's then how you get them to understand how it's profitable to do
Yeah.
this work.
Any examples? Do you have any stories out there of that kind of procedure and maybe some metrics on the back end on how the success rate of that?
Yeah, so I mean, I can tell you, I've worked with numerous organizations. I can tell you one that's really very, I have a soft spot for it because it's a smaller organization. This was an organization of about 30 employees, small organization here in the South, predominantly white organization, have been doing great work. But right around the time, it was right around the time of the murder of George Floyd, they decided they wanted to make commitments and wanted to see what they could, how they would move their organization forward. Now, with smaller companies, many times because they weren't looking to hire anyone immediately. So, that's always the first thing folks go to. It's like, oh, but, we don't know where to find diverse talent. And so, we're not going to be hiring immediately. We're a small team. And so how do we do this if we just don't have diverse people on our teams? I'm like, building equity into programs and building out diversity or a cultural competency through your organization is not just based on you having, and I should say diversity of, when you look at the organization, because it was predominantly white. I was like, but you've got women on staff, you've got different age ranges. I said, diversity means a lot of different, it doesn't mean diversity is it's diverse. And so when we held our very first team meeting and I had folks talk about themselves and their past experiences, and we found that majority of the folks on the team are very diverse, have very different backgrounds, very different upbringings, very different religions. I said, this is diversity. So even though you might
validating what they already have, right?
doesn't look a certain way.
Yeah.
I said, but if you want it to look a certain way, you got to be really intentional about that part too. So let's start thinking through one, in your organization, small organization, how are people promoted? Do people know how do they get promotions? With it being a small organization, is there opportunity for promotion? That's a part of diversity, because if I am here for 2 and 3 years and I don't see an opportunity for my job to increase, even though I'm learning all these things, how am I professionally developing myself? That too is about diversity. So
yeah,
including all of that
Wide
within
lens.
organizational competency, right? And so we went from that, and then we went into, having discussions about, their external reach. How are you delivering your programs? Who are you working with for partnerships? And they realized, we probably hadn't been partnering with folks that we didn't immediately know. So I reached into some of my networks who were in their area and said, I think it might be great for you guys to think about partnering on some things. And they were able to make some connections, which led them to doing some amazing work together, which then increased the company's profit by about 15% in the next year. And so looking at those diverse partnerships and people who they didn't think that they'd automatically be working with, and finding unique opportunities to create new business. That's another thing that having that open mind about being a culturally competent organization will do for you, because you don't
Yes.
know what partnerships are out there, and they may be looking for an organization like yours and then that edifies them in a different part of the sector. And other folks from that part of the other sector were like, hey, like, we heard that you helped work on this program. Maybe you guys can help us as well. So it just leads to overall.
I love this broad way that you're thinking about diversity.
Yes,
We kind of go tunnel vision on that, right? And yeah, and how the conversation you can gets deeper and deeper and broadens out to, like, like this could be a profit center we're talking
yes,
about right now. New business can arise out of it. That's really big for energy providers. So I thinking
absolutely.
differently, right? Like in this new we call it a transition, but I mean, let's face it, everything's changing with AI and and
As well as it should be, right? It should be changing, it should be shifting. But are you ready for that? Are organizations ready for it? Are they ready to embrace this time that we're in where things are shifting? They're going to shift. And do you have the capacity within your organization to make the shift and still be profitable? We all remember Blockbuster.
block what?
Right. Well, some of us remember Blockbuster. Unless I'm telling my
No, I do remember Blockbuster.
some of us remember Blockbuster, but they weren't prepared to shift with the changing times. And so when you think about, and I'm going to keep saying diversity, if you think about diversifying where you're placing your funds and your money and your partnerships, that's diversity, folks. That's
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Wow. I love the way you defined that. I mean, it's like expanded that for people to think, so it doesn't get so, again, like
yeah.
tunnel vision.
Don't be the old Blockbuster. Like,
Yes. Oh my God, that's a great story. Let me just get a little bit into ROI around this. So, like data collection, and measurement can be kind of tricky with equity work. Are there practical systems that you know or developed to help companies track and demonstrate? Because I know that you've done a lot of work on in metrics. Uh, a report that maybe you can help me with this report, the name of the report that you weighed in on, around energy equity, right? And the justice lenses for each. So back to this question. I know I just kind of went off. What are the practical systems that you might have developed or can help with to demonstrate ROI, right? From an equity investment standpoint.
yeah, so I would say you're going to have your tangible and intangible, right? You can have some quantifiable metrics, how many customers reached, how many participated in this program.
Yeah.
And I'll start by saying that I always work with metrics that an organization already has in place to be able to help them see where they can add to the metrics that they already have. Because sometimes they're like, we'd have to develop new KPIs. Not all the time. Not all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also then some intangible ones, like you could have a social score. How you're rated socially. You have your sustainability score. I think Ceres does that really well with corporations, but you do have like your ESG scores. How socially responsible are you as an organization? And what does that look like? So, and then you can have, ones where you actually go into communities and see the community impact scores. How do we impact a community with this work? You can look at, your rates of shutoff cases. Has that changed since you were able to put this program in place? So really utilizing some of the KPIs, because we're not asking people to reinvent the wheel, because I think you can get a lot of great information out of your KPIs and metrics that you currently have. But then it's that other part that you wanted to me add to your annual report every year is how how do we impact people's lives? That social impact. How do we impact people's lives? So we were able to save folks from this amount of cutoffs, or we were able to put this amount of dollars into programmatic work that kept this many household lights on during this amount of time. We kept this many houses heated during winter, so there's a swath of metrics, but I work with teams to come up with the metrics that feel, one, most comfortable to them, that feel attainable to them, not something that's just like pie in the sky that we cannot reach. And then maybe look at, and even internally, how are we communicating with our teams? We were able to change our systems in this way that now we're able to communicate this many times per year to our team, so they're kept abreast. Because again, that internal piece is really important. Transparency, communication, both internally and externally,
Yeah.
are also really important during this metric development stage, because you want to be able to talk to how you were able to do all this work. And most companies put out an annual report every year. And I'm really big on, again, I'm a corporate girl. I come from corporate. I'm really big on making sure you have an annual report that tells a story of how you were able to make organizational change and be profitable while doing the good work. So it all really does align together. So we can look at metrics you have. We can look at some sound metrics, some intangible metrics out there. But I think, to me, the best way that you'll be able to tell if you're doing good work is that people will tell you. Communities and folks will let you know that you're doing really good.
Yeah. Yeah. This is really important. I know, like, for them to have those stories and those metrics back to the investors, especially for investor-owned utilities.
Oh, yeah.
Little anecdotal story. Someone I know that works for a large utility told me that she was in a meeting, and someone came in from an investment firm, a very large investment firm, and usually the first thing they ask is, how are you doing on your decarbonization plan? Right? That's what she usually gets. But instead, this is just recently, he asked, do you have a just transition plan? And where is it? Like, oh, wow. I thought that was really good news.
Yeah,
That came out of his mouth. Because when the investors start asking for it, people move. It makes a difference. So
hopefully they had one.
or I think they had one in the making, right? In the making, which is good, right? I mean, because not all of them, what I see is like either they're starting out, right? Some of them are a little further on, and you know this because you I believe sit in a group with eSource, right, around some of those utilities that actually take it seriously,
Yeah.
right? But unfortunately, they're not the majority. Okay. And I'm not saying they don't take it seriously, but they don't put it really in the forefront of their business model. So I'm just hoping to see more of that, even no matter what's happening, because, an organization, a company has their own set of values, right? Whether, administrations come and go, right? But there's still there's the values that they live by. And I love that you said earlier, asking that first, like, let me see your mission statement. What are those values? How are they being expressed in your business right now? Right? How often do you look at this? And your programs reflect those values. I mean, you can just keep on digging into that, and
Absolutely.
that's way to go. So let me ask you as we begin to wrap up. I have one more question around this piece, that if we're looking out, let's just say 5 to 10 years from now, how do you see equity planning becoming even more critical to an energy provider's success? And what should they be looking at now to get ahead of the curve?
Well, what they should be doing right now is not backsliding. Don't backslide.
Oh, glad you said that.
Don't backslide on your commitments. Don't backslide on doing the great work that you're doing now. I like the administrations come and go. We've been here.
Yes.
We've been here before. We've been able to make some great advancements in renewable and diversifying our energy sources over the last few years. And I think that we will in the future see that continue. But what we need to do is be prepared. We need to be prepared. So not backsliding is paramount in this time. Like, continue to hold on to your commitments, continue to, I think if most organizations who took this seriously and put things in place and programs and work streams in place to see this work done, I have a feeling almost because I haven't seen any numbers that have said that when you put equity within programmatic work or diversity at the forefront of your organization, that it doesn't work out. I've yet to see that report. Like, everybody, that's what I know, there's profit.
Yeah.
So it's not going to hurt you to stay the course, but it might hurt you if you backslide.
Yeah.
And you don't stay the course.
Your customers don't like that at all.
Customers
When they see it so obviously, right? Oh,
they'll see it and and then you become ingenuine. And then you become less reputable. And then partners, especially those diverse partners that you've built up over the years, they're not going to want to work with you. Or they're not going to believe in what you say. So it's really about integrity. Like, stand by what you have put forth to do. And then I'll also have you remember that what you have put forth to do is for the benefit of people in communities. What you have put forth to do is it's not anything bad. You haven't done anything wrong and you haven't done anything bad. It's all good work. At the end of the day, it's still good business. So it's still going to be profitable. It's still doing the right thing. It's still helping people. And so, if they're not looking ahead to in 10 years, I hope that we're not talking about equity as much, that we're pushing the needle forward even more for all communities, that we're not talking about having to bring communities up, that those communities are now up, and all we're talking about is now, how do we advance everyone now that we're at this point?
Yeah, I love that. Maybe even the word equity isn't even part of the equation. Like, equity is like, it's been there, done that, right? Like, we're on to something even more expansive here, right? So
Now let's just be more innovative. Let's figure out how do we move this thing.
I love that. So let's change the word equity to innovative, because that will make it so that everyone benefits.
Absolutely.
Beautifully said. All right, last questions is personal one for you is like, if you can make your mark, which you have in so many ways, but going forward, make your mark in energy equity, what that would leave a lasting legacy. What would that be?
I think you said it. I feel like I'm doing that now. Like I told you, this isn't this work that I'm doing now wasn't by my design. And I'd like to think that this is purposeful work for me. Not only am I helping communities, and I want people to understand that, I've also done really great work with great partners from the federal agencies. I've also done really great work with corporations and small businesses, minority-owned businesses, and communities. And I'd like to, I think I consider myself a lot of times that intermediary between community, corporate structures, and federal agencies in our government.
Nice.
And helping to bridge that gap between all of them, because I care so much about all of this work. It's not that like, community feeds my soul, and I'm here to really help them understand that help them also understand the business case of this, and understand, like, yes, while people want to do the right thing, a lot of times they need to make money to keep their doors open too. So with that lens in mind, how are you treating your community organization like a business as well? So helping them to understand that part of it and how they build relationships and partnerships that best suit them. And I do the same thing across the board. So I think that's, for me, the legacy, that I just want to be the helper, the connector of people, places, resources, things, so we can see all of this be done in a way that benefits really the whole system. Like, we have to really start, like, acknowledging the past is one thing, and the past systems and past harms. We don't have to live there. We don't have to live there. We can move past this, but it's going to take a full system of folks to come together to undo those things. And so, like, I don't want to live in the past. I want to see communities move forward, happier, healthier, stronger, empowered. I want to see these energy systems work for the citizens of this country and for people abroad. I do a lot of work in Africa. I want to see it happen over there. I can't understand when I talk to my business partner there and he's without electricity for 3 and 4 and 5 days. It blows my mind.
Yeah.
I can't understand it. We have to be able to start making these systems work for people.
Right on. Beautifully said. And what a way to end the show. Thank you so much for coming on. How can people learn more about you?
Yes. So they can go to my website, which I think is currently under construction, but www.integratedsolutions.llc.net, or they can email me at discoverintegratedsolutions.llc.net.
Okay. Well, we'll have those in the show notes as well. Okay. If you happen to be driving at the moment, don't do that while you're driving. But we'll have that all in the show notes so people can get in touch with you, because, boy, what a benefit to bring you into an organization really and figure this out. It feels like there's some systematic, right? And you have a framework that can help them through this. And it's not that, it's not that difficult, right?
Yeah.
And what I hear is you'll be surprised where you might already be.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. They can also find me on LinkedIn, Pamela Phan on LinkedIn.
Okay, which is where I found you. I checked you out. So thank you again, Pamela, for joining us here today. And thank you for tuning in to the Just Power podcast. The time is now to create sustainable, equitable, accessible energy that leaves no one behind. We are all in this together. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe to Just Power wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really loved it, leave us a review and tell everyone you know about our podcast. It's going to take all of us to create a clean energy future that leaves no one behind.
The Just Power podcast is brought to you by New Mexico State University and Mind Over Markets, helping clean energy, clean tech, and regenerative businesses craft clear and compelling messaging that scales. Want to continue this conversation with Carolyn? Follow her on LinkedIn and follow the Just Power podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and on our YouTube channel. And for more intriguing conversations, follow New Mexico State University's microlearning social pages on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube.